Welcome back, everyone, to section 8 of our exploration of Pada 1 within the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I'm here once again with Danelle Mason, who will be leading us through the chants. Welcome, Danelle. It's good to see you.
Morning, good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Today, we're going to be looking at Sutras 140 through 145. And these are very important sutras. These sutras help us understand how to access samadhi. So the previous section, back in section 7, the Chitta Prasadnam sutras, those help to prepare us for the experience of samadhi. And the sutras we're going over today explore the phases of the process of experiencing samadhi. So they're extremely important. Now, before we get started, I would like to share with you, if you would like to support this effort, you can go to our Kriya Yoga online Patreon page, which is patreon.com/Kriya Yoga. And every month we have a monthly lesson. As you can see, this month we have the Chain of Enlightenment, which is focused on the yamas and niyamas, part 6. We have a monthly Q&A session and all kinds of things that happen. So if you're interested in supporting this class, please check that out. We'd love to see you over there. And we're going to get started with just a very simple meditation. So let's take a moment to close our eyes, sitting up straight. Directing our awareness into our meditation posture, feeling deeply into the body. Let your attention settle on the breath. And as you breathe, feel each slow exhalation as though there is a letting go, a relaxation. Moving your attention inward. And as my Kriya Yoga teacher would say, open your heart and your mind to the infinite. On each breath, open your heart and your mind to the infinite. You can move your awareness to the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. Noticing the increased sensitivity and temperature, pressure, the energy within the body. And with each breath, there is a relaxing, a letting go, a sense of attuning to that radiant field of being within you. The light of the ancient teachers of all saints and sages of all authentic enlightenment traditions. And before we begin today, we will honor and acknowledge the teachers who have inspired this process, this class. Roy Eugene Davis, my Kriya Yoga teacher. Swami Veda Bharati. Vyas Houston of the American Sanskrit Institute. And as we chant, meditate, and study together, may all of our obstacles be removed to learning and growth. May we understand deeply and appreciate fully what it means to meditate as an inspired yogi. Om, peace. All right. So we're going to get started today with Sutra 40 of Chapter 1. And Danelle, if you wouldn't mind, you can lead us through it.
Right, Sutra 140. So just like in previous weeks, I'll say a word or a couple of words together and then you repeat them back. So I'll do it twice and then we'll string the whole lot together. Okay, so Sutra 140. Paramanu, Paramanu, Paramamahatvanto, Paramamahatvanto, Paramanu, Paramamahatvanto, Paramanu, Paramamahatvanto, Asya Vashikaraha, Asya Vashikaraha, Paramanu, Paramamahatvantosya Vashikaraha, Paramanu, Paramamahatvantosya Vashikaraha.
Okay, Sutra 140. We'll look at the word by word breakdown. Paramanu, the smallest particle, the supreme atom, utterly minute object of focus. Parama, highest, supreme. Mahatva, greatness and vastness. Anta, extent, limit. Asya, of this, as in of the yogi. Vashikaraha, complete mastery, control. So the literal rendering is the mastery of the yogi's mind extends from the smallest particle to the greatest magnitude. The mastery of the yogi's mind extends from the smallest particle to the greatest magnitude. Many people misunderstand these kinds of statements, particularly when we begin exploring things like the siddhis in chapter 3 of the Yoga Sutras. Chapter 3, for example, is a guide for navigating the inner states of your consciousness. It is not meant for superpowers for you to demonstrate to your friends or people in the public. And similarly here, as we prepare ourselves for the experience of samadhi through the chitta prasadanam process and other supportive practices, eventually what happens is the yogi's mind, and when we're thinking about the yogi's mind here, we have to remember that the word mind for a yogi is different than just the collection of thoughts. Thoughts are just waves, vrittis, expressions within what we call the mind. We are referring to chitta. We are referring to the field of consciousness. And so as yogis, we eventually learn through this dedicated practice that occurs over a long period of time, which also includes non-attachment, abhyasa and vairagya. In meditation, one gains access to experiencing, feeling, perceiving, becoming, merging with the very smallest of possibilities, the smallest of atoms, and also of the greatest of magnitude. That the yogi's consciousness can fill, or I should say, the yogi's field of consciousness, chitta, can reflect the wholeness of life, can reflect the wholeness of the vastness of all experience. And this occurs slowly over time with practice. And so this sutra is essentially telling us that we are really training ourselves to gain mastery, complete mastery or control from the smallest particles to the greatest of magnitude, the greatest of experiences. And as our meditation practice, our yogic practice becomes firm, we can sit still, we can practice pratyahara and turn our awareness within. We learn to direct our experience to these things. And it is necessary to direct our experience to these things so that we can explore all of prakṛti nature, because by exploring all of this experience of nature, we realize that we aren't that. We realize that we are a supremely free, timeless, immortal consciousness. And the beauty of the Yoga Sutras is that it guides us through these stages, so that just like when you're going through school, they set this up differently in different countries, but you have school when you're 5 years old to 12 years old, and then eventually you see, well, okay, I've gotten that. So then you move on to the next stage, which would be maybe 13, clear through high school, when you become an adult, and you get a hold of that. And then eventually you could go into work, or you could go into a bachelor's program or a graduate program or a PhD program. But at some point in time, you have mastery over these things, and then you can live your life. You can live with the knowledge that you have gained. And so this process that we're seeing is this gathering of experience, this gathering of knowledge, so that we can exist as a spiritual being, free of all limitations. That's what we're going here. And so by exploring the smallest of particles to the greatest of magnitude, we gain this capacity. It opens itself up to us. Let's move on to the next sutra.
Okay, Sutra 141. Shina vrittir abhijatasya manir. Shina vrittir abhijatasya manir. Grahitre grahana grahyeshu. Grahitir grahana grahyeshu. Tatsta tadanjanata samapatti. Tatsta tadanjanata samapatti. Shina vrittir abhijatasya manir. Grahitre grahana grahyeshu. Tatsta tadanjanata samapatti. Shina vrittir abhijatasya manir. Grahitre grahana grahyeshu. Tatsta tadanjanata samapatti.
All right, and moving on to our next sutra. This is a long one, lots to look at here. So the literal rendering, we'll start there. When the mind's modifications have been weakened, it becomes like a flawless crystal, taking the color of whatever it rests upon, whether the knower, the instrument of knowing, or the object, that which is being known. This is called samapatti, absorption. Essentially, what this is telling us is, once our field of awareness, our field of consciousness, once those modifications, once those vrittis, once those changes become weakened, in the same way that the waves in a pond, when you stop making movements, the water settles down and becomes still. So as our chitta, we can think of it as this vast ocean. And as we become calm and still, and we let those things smooth out, eventually our field of consciousness, our field of being, our chitta becomes like a flawless crystal. And then whatever comes near it or whatever you're focused upon, you're able to experience it as directly as you can. And the focus can be on an object, it can be on how you're perceiving that object, and this refers to the senses. So how do you see a rose? Will you focus on that capacity for seeing? And it can also focus on the knower, the purusha, the seer, or that aspect of our nature, which is actually perceiving these things. This is a very dense and complicated sutra, but it's beautiful because it shares so much with you. For example, this idea of it becomes like a flawless crystal. Well, I can remember when I first started studying the sutras, I thought that was a neat idea. I thought that was a really good way to describe what's going on here. But what happens is, as you go through the yogic meditation process, which begins in our tradition with the Kriya Yoga meditation techniques, you start to have experiences where it's as if your field of consciousness actually is like this pristine, clear lens of awareness. And so if you're meditating on a rose, if you're meditating on the water element, if you're meditating on Om, it's as if that lens, or that, it can just best be described as this very pure crystal, is reproducing these experiences, and you are just observing the experience of it. So that might not make a whole lot of sense to you right now, but it's really important to pay attention to this, because as you progress through the stages of samadhi, and once you actually get a sense of what chitta is beyond just the concepts of thinking that it's a mind, there comes a point in time where you go, whoa, oh, he chose those words very well about it being like a flawless crystal. So if this seems too far out for you right now, don't worry about it. Just take note of this kind of description, and you'll find that as you continue with your process, you will understand what Patanjali was indicating here. But let's go up and look at each word. Kshina vrittir, of one whose mental modifications are weakened or dissolved. So as a yogi, that's what you're doing. And just like as you've noticed through your meditation practice, maybe you're less reactive, you're less angry, you're less anxious, you tend to think before you speak, or you don't just go unconscious and behave in certain ways. Well, the reason that's happening is because these triggers that you've got going on inside you, they've been smoothed out a little bit. So it takes a little bit more to trigger you. So as a yogi, just in general, across the board, in all aspects of your field of consciousness, mental modifications become less. So we're talking about you who are engaged in yoga. Abhijatasya, pure born, flawless. And again, referring to a gem that is naturally clear, like as if. So it's just saying that in a way, your chitta, your mind field, becomes as if like this. And as I mentioned, you will gain an actual experience, and you will know, oh, it is quite a bit like that. Mane, of a jewel or crystal, a flawless gemstone. Grahitri, the knower. The mind is the perceiver. I could probably fix that a little bit, but the knower, we can refer to that as the seer. We can refer to it as the purusha. It is that which is perceiving the experiences that pass through your field of awareness, whether it's an emotion, a thought, a physical object, an event, a circumstance. Grahana, the instrument of knowing. So the senses or mental faculties. And we have the senses like the eyes, the ears, the tongue, and so on. They perceive these things, but there are also subtle senses in your antakarana. And so there's an instrument of knowing, which is connecting the object to the seer. And we can meditate on those senses which are connecting the objects that we see, like the tree outside, to the actual knower within. Grahyeshu, the objects of knowledge, again, that which is being perceived. When you see a tree, that is what is being perceived. When you think about these three, there's a neat way to kind of get an idea about it. And we're not going to go on some strange tangent about, are we all in a simulation? That's possible, but that's just trendy right now. So let's try to avoid that. Something better that we can consider is your nervous system. For example, you have this nervous system, you have this brain, you have these nerves, which are taking in the information around you. And so, are you actually interacting with the screen that you're looking at or the speakers that you're hearing the sound coming out of? Or is the nervous system, is the brain putting all of this together for you and creating this experience for you? So, in this lineup, the grahyeshu, that would be the speakers that you hear or the screen that you see. The grahana, the instrument of knowing, that's the electricity flowing through the nervous system, flowing through the ears, flowing through the eyes, bringing, in a way, the experience to what? To the grahitri, the knower. The brain is processing all of this, and it's actually still a part of the instrument of knowing, and it is presenting it to what? Well, we can't really perceive that, can we? But it is the consciousness which is flowing through or utilizing the nervous system to interact in this manifest reality. So really kind of even meditate on that is a fascinating thing and can be very helpful for you. Tatsta, resting in that. Tad anjanata, taking on its color or quality. Samapatti, so cognitive absorption. I'm going to do a little more research into the word samapatti because complete cognitive absorption indicates samadhi. And this is, in a way, a type of samadhi, but Patanjali would have said samadhi, I believe. Like I said, I need to do some more research on this, if that's exactly what he meant. So I'll get back to you there. But ultimately, this sutra, when the mind's modifications have been weakened, when you are flowing your awareness within, when you are sensing more into the core of your being, and you are just witnessing, you're just observing. You could use the idea of the crystal, or you could even use the idea of a window, because a window is like a crystal. When the window has stuff all over it, it's harder to perceive what's outside of the window clearly. But when the window has its modifications removed, you can't even see the window, but yet it's letting information and light in. It becomes like a flawless crystal, taking the color of whatever it rests upon, whether it is the knower abiding as the seer aspect, the witness aspect, the instrument, that which makes it possible for you to have experiences, or the object, the actual physical elements. This is called samapatti, or absorption. Okay, let's see what Patanjali has next to say about this process.
Sutra 142. Tatra shabdartha, tatra shabdartha, jnana vikalpai, jnana vikalpai. Tatra shabdartha, jnana vikalpai. Tatra shabdartha, jnana vikalpai. Sankirna savitarka samapatti. Sankirna savitarka samapatti. Tatra shabdartha jnana vikalpai. Sankirna savitarka samapatti. Tatra shabdartha jnana vikalpai. Sankirna savitarka samapatti.
Sutra 142. Literal rendering. There, absorption will be mixed with conceptual distinctions of words, meaning, and knowledge. And this is called Savitarka samapatti. So there, absorption, when it's mixed with conceptual distinction of words, meanings, and knowledge, this is called Savitarka samapatti. Is very important because so many people have an interesting view of samadhi, as if usually the view is if someone has just taken a really wonderful, mind expanding, blissful drug. And maybe, but usually most people don't jump to that state. They have to go in stages. And so one of the first stages to cultivate is exactly what Patanjali is describing here. And that is having a focus on a concept which uses words, imagination, knowledge, again, conceptualizations, distinctions. Because if you use your chitta, your mind field, if you can't make it completely still, well, one thing you can do is saturate it with a theme. For example, if I'm outside and let's say I'm using a tree as an object of meditation, there can be a lot of things going on around me. I can have memories of things that happened earlier in the day about relationship issues. And that's a lot of waves and fluctuations going within my field of consciousness. But the moment I sit down and I look at a tree and my senses rest on that tree, immediately the waves are stilling and they're focusing in. Now, if I look at that tree and I say to myself in my head, the leaves are green, the bark is brown, the bark is gnarly. If I think about how the roots go down into the ground and I imagine the water being absorbed up through the ground into the tree, I'm still focused on the tree. I'm not thinking about my relationships. I'm not thinking about all this other stuff. All I am is focused on this theme of the tree. And I contemplate how the water moves through the trees and then is released through the leaves and releases moisture so that we have clouds. And then I notice there's a bird in the branch of the tree. And I can go on and on about this. But essentially what I'm trying to get at here is in that moment, when all I am focused on is the theme of the tree, the concepts, the words, the names, the meanings, all those things, I am experiencing what's called Savitarka Samadhi or Savitarka Samapatti. And that is a beginning stage of the process, because many people can't just clear their mind, or they can't just say, I'm going to focus on God, and all of a sudden their mind rests on God for the next hour and 30 minutes. But what they can do is they can begin to train themselves. And what they'll find is in the beginning, it might be kind of distracting trying to focus on that tree. But eventually, over a few days and not very long, they will find that they can sit there for 15 minutes and all they are thinking about is the tree. In that 15-minute period of time, thousands of other vrittis and fluctuations have calmed down. And now they're just focusing on maybe 10 to 30. And in that situation, they are creating a positive imprint within their field of consciousness, which will give them a better capacity to focus more intently the next time and the next time. And every time we go through this focusing on a theme, this imprint gets deeper, this groove gets deeper. And this will take us into the ideas of Nirodha, but we're not there at the moment. But anyway, this sutra is telling us that we can start with a theme. We can start with a tree. We can start with a candle flame. We can start with our concepts of divinity. Why do we have Ganesh? Why do we have Hanuman? Why do we have Saraswati? And why do we have all these stories about all these gods and goddesses? Well, just imagine if you sat down and you just absorbed yourself in the names, in the mantras, in the imagery, in the memories of the stories of these gods and goddesses. You would be making your mind more sattvic, which is automatically going to pull you closer to samadhi. And the fact that you're sticking to a theme is serving this particular sutra, which is saying that by doing that, you are experiencing Savitarka samapatti also. An idea is that it is like a beginner version of Samadhi, but it's a great way to start. And it's very accessible, it's very actionable, and you get to see the positive results over the course of several weeks or several months. And then once this becomes established, then we move on to the next stage. And before we move on to the next chanting, I do want to go through each of these words. Tatra, there in that context. Shabda, word, name. Artha, meaning, object. Jnana, knowledge or a concept. Vikalpai, with distinctions and conceptualizations. Sankirna, mixed, blended together. So it's not yet purified, but we're getting there. Savitarka, with reason or deliberation. And that's the focusing on the theme, the choosing to, instead of letting your mind, your field of consciousness go all over the place, to say, nope, I'm at least zeroing it into this particular direction. And I know you've heard me say this before. It's like when you're trying to begin becoming a skilled archer. Well, there's a hill, there's the target, and there's the bullseye. If you've never pulled back a bowstring before, your first job is just hit the hill. As long as you can hit the hill, you're going to be good. And then as you get better at that, then you bring it into the target. And you might hit just the top of the target, but you're getting closer. And then as you progress, eventually we get closer to the bullseye, right? That's the idea here. All right. Let's see. With reasoning, Savitarka, samapatti, absorption, complete coalescence. Great. So let's move on to the next sutra.
Sutra 143. Smriti parishuddhau, smriti parishuddhau, svarupa shunye vartamatra, svarupa shunye vartamatra, nirbhasa nirvitarka, nirbhasa nirvitarka. Smriti parishuddhau svarupa shunye vartamatra nirbhasa nirvitarka. Smriti parishuddhau svarupa shunye vartamatra nirbhasa nirvitarka.
Next sutra, 143. Literal rendering. When memory is purified, the mind appears as if empty of its own form, and only the object itself shines forth. This is Nirvitarka samapatti. So previously we had Savitarka, now we're talking about Nirvitarka. And before we go into each of the words, let's just see what is the difference here. So when the mind is purified, or when memory is purified, the mind appears as if empty of its own form. Now, very important, when memory is purified, when you sit to meditate, what is getting in the way of your capacity to experience deeper states of your being, your memory? All the stuff that's coming up and flashing through your mind, even random images, they're coming from that deep storehouse of memory. So the more you learn to focus, the more you learn to settle in and relax into the experience. Not only do the fluctuations get less, but also the causes of the fluctuations get less. The memory becomes purified. And then the mind, or the chitta, appears as if empty of its own form. It's when you've had an open mind. And remember a time when you have just been present and you just saw the things that were coming through, but you weren't commenting on it. The mind was empty of its own form, and then only the objects that are presented to the mind, they shine forth. This is Nirvitarka samapatti, or Samadhi. And this is the next stage of these steps of samadhi. Savitarka, you're focusing on a theme, you're creating a groove. Well, eventually that groove gets so strong that once you put your attention there, it keeps going. And you've had this happen in all different kinds of circumstances unconsciously. When you've listened to a song that you really liked and the song was over, but it kept playing over and over in your mind. For example, when we do chants and kirtan at the retreats that we lead throughout the year, we have a night where we do music. And most people find that after that's over, for the rest of the evening, even into their dreams, the chants continue to repeat. And that's because the momentum of it has carried it forth, but they're not trying to do it anymore. You've had this happen when you've had an encounter that you wished you would have said something different. You're replaying over and over the experience. Well, that momentum is still going. Well, as yogis, we're learning to do this consciously. And so every day when you sit down and you meditate on, for example, Om Namah Shivaya, and you know what that mantra means, and you're focusing on the theme of it, and you're focusing on the ideal of Shiva and so on, every day that's creating a groove and a momentum. Well, there will come a point in time where you go through your japa, you go through your mantra, and then you just sit there and you find that you're still doing it, but you're not trying to do it. This is the Nirvitarka samapatti, where you are settling into a subtler experience of the process, and the momentum carries itself. So let's look at each of the words. So smriti, memory; parishuddhau, when memory is completely purified; svarupa, one's own form, self nature. We've seen this earlier on in the first few sutras. Shunya, empty or void; eva, as if; artha matra, the mere object. Artha, we know, is a purpose, and matra means like a measure, how you measure something. Nirbhasa, shining forth, appearing clearly, and then nirvitarka, without deliberation. So now when you look at the tree, you don't have to keep talking about it in your head. You don't have to keep imagining aspects of it. You don't have to keep directing your awareness back to it. It happens naturally. And now you're experiencing a subtler step in the process of samadhi. And again, this all works beautifully. If you just take the steps, it happens, and you find the real importance of the methodology that Patanjali is putting forth. Let's go ahead and consider the next sutra.
We've got Sutra 144. Etayaiva savicāra, etayaiva savicāra, nirvicāra cha, nirvicāra cha. Etayaiva savicāra, nirvicāra cha. Etayaiva savicāra, nirvicāra cha. Sūkṣma-viṣaya vyakta, sūkṣma-viṣaya vyakta. Etayaiva savicāra, nirvicāra cha. Sūkṣma-viṣaya vyakta. Etayaiva savicāra, nirvicāra cha. Sūkṣma-viṣaya vyakta.
Sutra 144. Sutra 144. By this same explanation are described savicāra and nirvicāra samapatti, which have subtle objects. We are continuing with these steps or these stages of samadhi. And we had Savitarka and Nirvitarka. That's more of a gross experience where you're focusing on a theme, again, of a tree, of an element, of a mantra, and so on, like the sound of the mantra. We're focusing on the physical characteristics of the mantra. And once that becomes established, then the groove, the momentum takes on an experience of its own. We experience samadhi in this state. Well, there's another step, another stage, the savicāra and nirvicāra. And the focus is on vichara, which is subtle reflection, or subtle experience. This is a little harder to talk about and a little harder to describe. One really needs to spend some time cultivating the first two before this will make a lot more sense, but I'll do my best here. So in the vichara, or the subtle reflection state, we are moving away from the physical. And so, for example, one of the best ways to reflect upon that could be with the breath. When we're breathing, if we're doing Savitarka and Nirvitarka, it could simply be, I feel the breath flowing in, and then you actually feel your lungs expanding. You feel the breath going into your lungs. You're focusing on the sensation of the breath moving in through the nose and up through the sinuses. You are really directing your attention to the theme of the physical breath. You can even say things like, the breath flows in from the atmosphere and merges with my body, and then my body expels breath, and then that merges with the atmosphere. Anything that's keeping you on that physical movement of the theme of the breath is going to be the Savitarka, and then eventually the Nirvitarka stage. Now, the savicāra and the nirvicāra stage, this is when you let go of the physical sensation of the breath, and you begin just noticing the movement of life force within the body. And to me, that begins by, instead of letting the breath be deep and more expansive, letting go of any trying, and then just noticing when I feel like my body wants to breathe. Like, what is the energy I feel in my body when it seems like the tissues need breath? And you can feel that throughout your body. As I mentioned, this is very subtle, and really, I've spent whole classes on this alone, the subtle breath, but this will give you an idea of it. And then once your capacity to focus on the subtle, because the subtle is harder to focus on than the physical, but once you develop that capacity, it becomes natural for you. Well, what happens is the nirvicāra stage comes, where now you are not trying, you're not thinking about, you're not saying, when does it feel like the tissues need to breathe? What does it feel like to have this energy of this prana moving through the body? And again, don't just use your words, feel it within the body in the felt sense. But when you can hold your attention on the body and observe this kind of breath, this flowing through the body, through your whole, your body, your being in a way, then you're experiencing the nirvicāra stage. It's a subtle momentum, and you are sinking more deeply into it, and it's as if happening of its own accord. So by the same explanation are described savicāra and nirvicāra, which have subtle objects. So etaya eva, by this very explanation, savicāra with subtle reflection, nirvicāra without subtle reflection, cha and sūkṣma-viṣaya having subtle objects as their focus, and then vyakta are explained. Patanjali is simply, in this very small phrase, telling you that the process that you engaged in to sync your chitta, your focus on a theme more physically, more externally, that same process applies to inner observation, inner exploration, to our subtle capacities. So the same process follows, but you got to start with Savitarka, Nirvitarka before you jump to it. People try to jump ahead and they just get tripped up. You have to go through the whole process. Okay, let's see. 144. So we have one more sutra left to explore today.
Right, looking at Sutra 145. Sūkṣma-viṣayatvam, sūkṣma-viṣayatvam, Aliṅga paryavasanam, Aliṅga paryavasanam, sūkṣma-viṣayatvam, Aliṅga paryavasanam, sūkṣma-viṣayatvam, Aliṅga paryavasanam.
One 145. Literal rendering. The subtle object stage extends up to that which has no distinguishing mark, Aliṅga, the unmanifest. The subtle object stage extends up to that which has no distinguishing mark, Aliṅga, the unmanifest. Once again, this really requires that we have a sense of Sankhya philosophy. And I would recommend to get the book Kriya Yoga and the primordial powers of creation, Kriya Yoga and the primordial powers of creation. This is a book I wrote in a class that I did that really goes into this. And if you go to kriya-yoga.teachable.com, there is a class there on Sankhya philosophy, and it is Kriya Yoga and the primordial powers of creation. And there are meditations there which will help you to understand this sutra better. So there's a lot behind this particular sutra, and it really requires an understanding of Sankhya philosophy. But this subtle object stage, it extends up to that which has no distinguishing mark. Well, what is that has no distinguishing mark? That is the primal state of matter. That is the primordial experience of prakṛti, nature. And so what Patanjali is telling us here is we begin with the gross, the physical, Savitarka, Nirvitarka. Once we get really good at that, then we can begin exploring the subtle realm. And the subtle realm begins with the subtle elements, and it extends up through the senses, and it extends up through into the antakarana, the sense of manas, the sense of ahaṁkāra, the I, up through buddhi, mahat, these fields of light, which are absolutely incomprehensible, but completely experienceable. So what he's telling us is we keep exploring this process back and back and back. And later on in the Yoga Sutras, he describes the process as the inverse propagation of the gunas, the pratiprasavaha, the inverse propagation of the gunas. The gunas come forth and they create life, they create creation, they create everything that we experience. And finally, we get rocks and stars and rivers and minerals and bodies and so on. Well, as you go through the Yoga Sutras, you realize the yoga practice is the opposite. It's withdrawing, it's exploring back up into the subtle realms until you reach, as he's describing here, the unmanifest, the Aliṅga stage. And once we become comfortable exploring those subtle realms, which takes a while, so don't get ahead of yourself, but if you follow the process, you will be able to do it. This all occurs by having this understanding of the Savitarka, Nirvitarka, savicāra, nirvicāra stages. These 4 stages help lead you through the inverse propagation of the gunas, clear to the most subtle experience that you can have. And then, of course, that will indicate our samadhis with seed, with support, which will come up in the next sutra we'll cover next time. And then once we become very good at our samadhis with support, once we become skillful with that, then through the process of Ishvara Pranidhana and so on, we eventually experience samadhi without seed, complete freedom, kaivalya. But we have to go through these stages first. So let's look at each of these words. Sūkṣma means subtle, beyond gross perception. Viṣayatvam, the condition of being an object. Cha, and. Aliṅga, without a distinguishing mark. vasanam, culmination, the final limit. In what we've explored today, this is potentially telling you this is the map. And we've only done it in what? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 sutras or so. So in 6 sutras, potentially he said, here is the map. And it's through your yogic process that you navigate that map. But we also have to remember that we need other information for this to make sense, which is Sankhya philosophy. And this is why so many commentaries on the Yoga Sutras really just turn into pithy little ideas or platitudes or nice little phrases to make you feel good about yourself, because they're not taking into consideration the vast body of knowledge behind the map that we have here. But if you can figure out what the map is, if you can engage the process, this process works. This process works. And I just love these sutras. So to that end, Danelle is going to chant each of these sutras, but I'd like to encourage you to, before going into this longer chanting session that Danelle is about to take us through, reflect upon what we have talked about today. Really reflect upon what was it? What is the magnitude? What is the hugeness of what Patanjali is sharing with us here? And when you get that in your mind, when you saturate your chitta with the amazingness of it, and then you begin chanting these sutras with Danelle here, well, you are beginning the process of engaging the steps to samadhi by holding that amazing experience in your mind, that possibility in your mind, and chanting these things, feeling the vibration of the body and so on as you go. You are beginning this process. So these are very, very important sutras. Okay, Danelle, take it away.
All right. So we'll do each one, and you'll repeat it after me, and then we'll do them all in a row, and then we'll do that twice. Okay. So just getting settled, sitting tall, soften the shoulders, opening the heart. Paramanu paramamahatvantosya vashikaraha. Paramanu paramamahatvantosya vashikaraha. Shinavrittir abhijatasye manir grahitre grahana grahyeshu tatsta tadanjanata samapatti. Shinavrittir abhijatasye manir grahitre grahana grahyeshu tatsta tadanjanata samapatti. Tatra shabdartha jnana vikalpai sankirna savitarka samapatti. Tatra shabdartha jnana vikalpai sankirna savitarka samapatti. Smriti parishuddhau svarupa shunye vartamatra nirbhasa nirvitarka. Smriti parishuddhau svarupa shunye vartamatra nirbhasa nirvitarka. Etayaiva savicāra nirvicāra ca sūkṣma-viṣaya vyakta. Etayaiva savicāra nirvicāra ca sūkṣma-viṣaya vyakta. sūkṣma-viṣayatvam ca liṅga paryavasanam. Sūkṣma-viṣayatvam ca liṅga paryavasanam. Paramānu paramamahatvantosya vaṣīkārah. Śhīnavritterabhijatasya manir grahitre grahana grahyeshu tatsta tadanjanata samapatti. Tatra shabdartha jnana vikalpai sankirna savitarka samapatti. Smriti parishuddhau svarupa shunye vartamatra nirvasa nirvitarka. Etayaiva savicāra nirvicāra ca sūkṣma-viṣaya vyakta. Sūkṣma-viṣayatvam ca liṅga paryavasanam. Paramānu paramamahatvantosya vaṣīkārah. Śhīnavritterabhijatasya manir grahitre grahana grahyeshu tatsta tadanjanata samapatti. Tatra shabdartha jnana vikalpai sankirna savitarka samapatti. Smriti parishuddhau svarupa shunye vartamatra nirvasa nirvitarka. Etayaiva savicāra nirvicāra ca sūkṣma-viṣaya vyakta. Sūkṣma-viṣayatvam ca liṅga paryavasanam.
Thank you very much, Danelle. As always, it's wonderful to hear you chant and appreciate you leading us through that. Once again, before we conclude today, I want to share with you, if you feel like supporting our class here or this Kriya Yoga ministry at Kriya Yoga Online, you can go to patreon.com and then just type in Kriya Yoga there, patreon.com/Kriya Yoga. And the class I was talking about previously was Kriya Yoga and the Primordial Powers of Creation. And this is a 7-section class, 7-week class, which will take you through what you need to know of Sankhya philosophy. And there are also guided meditations within this course to help make it more real and more experiential for you. So you can go to kriya-yoga.teachable.com, and then you'll see the Kriya Yoga and Primordial Powers of Creation course. All right. So thank you very much, Danelle. It's always good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yep. I look forward to seeing you again next week. And let's just chant Om 3 times together to conclude this session. peace. Thank you.